San Francisco is about to host a conference that aims to help our health, the planet, and animals all at the same time. We're talking about Reducetarianism, and Brian Kateman joining us now. He is the author of Meet Me Halfway. Thanks so much for joining us. What are we talking about here?
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, the reality is that in high-income countries like the United States, we eat a lot of meat. And, I grew up eating meat. I love meat. But the problem is that the way we produce meat, it's not particularly healthy when we consume it in such large quantities. It's not good for the planet. And it's also not kind to animals because most of those animals are raised in something called factory farms. But, a lot of people I know don't want to go vegan or vegetarian, and I can understand that. But one of the things that we can all do is we can simply cut back on the amount of animal products that we consume. We can simply eat less meat, eggs, and dairy. And so I created a movement, a community called Reducetarian. And the idea is that meat consumption doesn't have to be an all or nothing premise. If we can all acknowledge that the world would be a better place if we ate less of it, that would be a good thing. And so we can do our best simply by eating less meat.
Now, there are a lot of different motivations for people to become a reducetarianist. Talk about them.
Yeah, the reality is that everyone's going to come to this movement from a different perspective, right? And so, I worry about my parents sometimes. They struggle, heart disease runs in our family. We all know that eating too much saturated fat is not good for our hearts. And so leaning into eating more fruits and vegetables is not a particularly controversial idea. That's a good thing. We know that meat consumption is very resource intensive. Many of us are worried about the global climate crisis. We're worried about resource shortages like fresh water. And so, eating plants, it just has a much lower environmental footprint. And then from an animal perspective, I love my dogs, Toby and Cooper behind me. I care about animals. I think most of us do. And nobody really likes how chickens and pigs and cows and so on are raised in particular places called factory farms. And so if we eat less meat, really for all of those reasons, the world is a better place. And so regardless of what one's individual motivation is, the reality is that eating more carrots and kale and apples and so on is just better for the planet. And we should all do our best in trying to lean into a plant-forward diet.
So there are no real measurements here, though. If you join the movement, you embrace reducetarianism, and that's, I think, is difficult for a lot of people who do this all or nothing approach, and they need rules or guidelines. That's not something you have here.
We do have some recommended strategies, but you are right that the average person in the United States eats about 225 pounds of meat a year, which is a ton. It's way too much. So if a person says, I'm going to cut back 10% or 20%, they're a reducetarian. They are a person who's made the decision to cut back, and that's wonderful. It really is. It makes a big difference. Even if a person is still eating a lot of meat, simply making small changes to their diet, especially if we all participate, is a great thing. But you're right. Sometimes people benefit from having some guidelines. So let me give you a couple. One is that a person could embrace Meatless Monday, where they don't eat meat on Mondays. They could try out vegetarian or vegan before 6. Essentially, they're eating vegan meals for breakfast and lunch. Or they can be a weekday vegetarian, nothing with a face Monday through Friday, and on the weekends, it's their choice. Regardless of what strategy a person takes on, it's really this general idea of moving in a more plant-forward direction and really acknowledging that this is challenging. There's a reason why we eat so much meat, and we have to be understanding of that. There's a lot of cultural forces at play here. And I really believe that if we're compassionate, not just toward the planet and toward animals and toward our passions, but also toward people, and understanding that this can be challenging, we actually will increase our chances of getting there. We'll increase our chances of getting the people that we love in our lives to eat more fruits and vegetables, to eat more plant-based meat, and so on.
And just be a little more mindful. Don't just go to meat by default. I think that's what a lot of people do. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have the vegan, the vegetarian movement. What is the relationship between the reducetarian movement with, say a lot of hardcore vegans would say, if you're not with us, you're against us, you're still eating meat, and they would look down on this movement.
Yeah, I have a lot of love for vegans and vegetarians. I really admire their passion, and I understand why they care so much about this issue, because we really do raise animals and grow food in ways that are really quite cruel and environmentally destructive and not good for people's health. So I understand where the frustration comes from. But it is the simple reality that most people are not going to go vegan or vegetarian. And if we embrace that simple fact, it leaves us with a couple of options. Do we sort of, I don't know, yell and scream and get frustrated, or do we provide people with an alternate choice, which is a sort of more moderate message around reduction of animal products? In terms of our work, a lot of our supporters are vegans and vegetarians. They, live in this world. They understand they have family and friends who are not necessarily interested in cutting out animal products entirely from their diet. And in fact, in my mind, a vegan, a vegetarian is a reducetarian. These are individuals who have cut back on the amount of animal products that they consume. They've just done it so successfully that they eat none at all. But I really like this reducetarian framework because it allows us to focus on our shared commonality. We get so caught up at the dinner table, fighting all the time. If we can acknowledge, hey, we don't like factory farms, we understand that we need to reduce societal consumption of animal products. I think that's a more unifying message. It allows us to find some common ground rather than getting caught up in who's the more perfect person. I often say, I try to be a good son. I try to be a good husband. I try to be a good parent to Toby and Cooper. In no area of my life am I perfect. And what Reducetarian is about is just trying to be the best possible person that you can be with respect to your own diet, with respect to your own constraints in the world. And I really think that that's a difficult message to disagree with. It's pretty common sense in a way.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And right, you would get a lot of people on board that would say, oh, maybe I would be a vegetarian, but I still got to have my burger once in a while. And that would be acceptable within this movement. So it sounds like it is very inclusive. Tell us about the conference coming up in May.
I'm so excited about the conference. It's very soon. Each year, we bring together hundreds of advocates and CEOs and entrepreneurs and media and policymakers and so on, really all the people who are interested in this idea of ending factory farming, reducing consumption of animal products, increasing consumption of plant-based food. My favorite statistic is that 60% of our attendees are not vegan or vegetarian. I really wanted there to be a place for people who hadn't necessarily cut out animal products, but deeply cared about this issue. And part of what I always say is that what we put into our mouth, of course, is very important, but what comes out of it is even more important. And what I mean by that is that for people who are deeply interested in this space, they can become members of their community and do incredible things. They can open a vegan restaurant. They can run for office and create food policy issues that are in favor of this idea. There's so many things that we can do in our neighborhoods, in our community, in our world as people. And we wanted to create a space where all of the different people who are interested in this come together and, of course, learn, but also network for the purposes of trying to actually do great things to advance the Reducetarian movement. So I'm so excited that our Reducetarian Summit is back, and I'm thrilled that it's in San Francisco this year.
All right, you can find out more about Brian's summit at reducetarian.org. Brian, also the author of Meet Me Halfway. Thanks for spending some time with us this morning on CBS News Bay Area.
Thank you so much.